Somewhere in the dark, high on a mountainside, a single pine branch is holding the weight of the night's snow. It bends, and it bends, and it does not break. It only lowers, slowly, toward the ground it came from. All around it, the forest is silent in the way that only deep winter is silent. Each tree carries its own soft white burden. The cold air does not move. The sky above is thick and low and close, heavy with more snow that has not yet begun to fall, and the whole mountain seems to be waiting for something it cannot name. Maybe you know this weight tonight. Maybe you have been carrying something for so long that you have forgotten it was ever a choice to hold it at all. Something your heart keeps reaching back toward, even now, in the dark, even though you already know that it is gone, or changed, or was never quite yours to keep. And still the hand will not open. Still the heart leans toward what it has lost. If it would ease you, lower the sound of my voice until it is no louder than the snow settling outside. Close your eyes. Let your body grow a little heavier than it was a breath ago. There is nothing in these next hours that you need to hold on to, and nothing you must carry through to the end. I will tell you something I have only come to understand slowly, and never all at once. For most of my life, I believed that holding on was the same thing as loving, that if I loosened my grip on anything at all, I was letting it fall and be lost. It took me many winters to notice that the branch does not love the snow any less on the night it finally lets it go. Tonight I would like to sit beside you through 11 small moments of one quiet ache, some of them carrying a single story, and some of them two. They come to us from the Chan masters of old China, from Zen temples in the mountains of Japan, from a Korean hillside and a shrine in Sri Lanka, and from ordinary lives that history never troubled itself to name. Each of them turns, in its own unhurried way, toward the moment of setting something down. These stories are contemplative in nature and are not a substitute for medical or therapeutic care. So let the room grow dim around you. Let the whole of the day you carried in with you rest just outside the door, where it will wait for you, patient and unhurried, until the light comes back. Feel the surface beneath you accept your full and settling weight. And far away, high on the mountain, in the deep and gentle dark, let us begin where the snow is still quietly falling. High on that same mountain, where we left the snow still falling, the night deepens, and the cold settles into the stones of an old monastery that has stood among the cedars for longer than anyone living can remember. Somewhere inside its walls, a young monk lies awake, listening to the wind move through the pines, unable to find the doorway into sleep. He is not troubled by anything happening now. He is troubled by something that happened once, and finished, and will not stay finished in his mind. Perhaps you know a little of how that feels, to lie in the dark and be kept awake by a thing that is already over. There is a particular kind of tiredness that has nothing to do with the body. It comes in the smallest hours, when the house is quiet and there is nothing left to distract the mind. And without warning, you are back inside a conversation from long ago. Maybe it was the last thing you said to someone before they left, or before they were gone for good. Maybe it was a single sentence, sharper than you meant it, that you would give almost anything to soften now. And so you begin to rebuild it. You imagine yourself saying the kinder thing, the wiser thing, the thing you only thought of hours or years too late. You run the moment again and again, as if this time the words might land differently as if this time you might reach back through all that distance and set it right. Morning comes, and nothing has changed, except that you are a little more tired, and the moment is still exactly where it always was. And still, the next night, you return to it, because it feels as though leaving would be a kind of betrayal. The teachers of old had a quiet understanding of this. They saw that so much of what keeps us awake is not the present moment at all, but the mind's endless return to a moment that has already passed beyond our reach. The past cannot be re-entered. It cannot be edited, or improved, or lived a second time in a gentler way. And yet the heart goes on trying, mistaking the effort for love, mistaking the grasping for loyalty. Long ago, in the mountains of old China, a young monk carried exactly this weight up a snowbound path, and an old teacher showed him, without ever once raising his voice, what he had truly been holding all along. The ridgeline stood blue-black against a sky the color of ash, and the snow came down without sound. Below the ridge, the monastery courtyard lay under a smooth white cover, broken only by a single swept path. And along that path, in the grey light before dawn, a young monk named Huai moved a worn broom back and forth, his breath clouding in the air, his bare knuckles red and cracked around the cold wood of the handle. He swept this same stretch of stone every morning. It was his task, and he was glad of it, because the sweeping gave his hands something to do while his mind did the thing it could not stop doing. For what Huai could not stop doing, every dawn and every night, was speaking again to a man who could no longer hear him. His first teacher, old Master Bai, had raised him in a smaller temple down in the valley. He had taught him his letters and his bows and the long patience of sitting still. And on the last morning of the old man's life, Huai, tired and young and certain that he knew better, had spoken to him sharply. He could not now even remember what the argument had been about, only the shape of his own voice, harder than it should have been, and the way the old man had simply looked at him and said nothing at all. By evening, Master Bai was gone, and the sharp words hung in the air of Huai's memory, unanswered, unsoftened, for good. So each night, he rebuilt that morning. He lay on his thin mat and imagined himself gentle. He said, into the dark, the words he wished he had said. He said them carefully, tenderly, 100 different ways, and each time he waited, as though the old man might somehow hear the better version at last and be comforted by it. Each time, there was nothing, only the wind in the pines, and the cold, and the same ache waiting for him again the following night. The abbot of the mountain monastery was very old, older even than Master Bai had been, and he missed very little of what happened around him. One dusk, as the snow thickened and the light failed, he found Huai standing motionless at the edge of the swept path, staring at nothing, the broom forgotten in his hands. The abbot did not ask what was wrong. He only said, "Walk with me a moment," and he led the young monk beneath the great pine that leaned over the courtyard wall. Its dark boughs bent low under the whole day's weight of snow. Snow had gathered on the old man's shoulders and in the deep folds of his robe, and he made no move to brush it away. Behind them, far off across the courtyard, a single oil lamp burned in the window of the meditation hall, a small warm point of gold in all that blue and failing light. For a long moment the abbot only looked up into the dark branches, listening, it seemed, to something Huai could not hear. "What is it you carry?" the old man asked at last. "That is so heavy, you have stopped sweeping in the very middle of your own path." "Words," Huai said, before he could stop himself. "Words I said to my teacher before he died. I would take them back. I have tried to take them back every night for a year. Then take them back now," the abbot said. "Say them again, the way you wish you had said them. I am listening." Huai's throat tightened, but he spoke. Softly, into the falling snow, he said the gentle thing at last, the tender thing he had rehearsed on 100 sleepless nights. And when he had finished, the old man was quiet for a long moment. "Did he hear you?" the abbot asked. "No," Huai whispered. "He is gone. He cannot hear me." The old man nodded slowly, as though this were the very answer he had been hoping for. "Then the word you spoke that morning," he said, "has already left you. It left in the instant you spoke it, the way an arrow leaves the string and does not come back, the way warmth leaves a room the moment the door is opened. You have spent a whole year reaching for a thing that is no longer anywhere to be reached. The word was never in your hands, my child. Only your fist was, closing and closing around the empty place where it had once been." As he spoke, high above them, the bough of the great pine gave a soft, low sigh and let its whole weight of snow slip free. It came down in a slow white curtain, breaking apart into powder in the cold air, and the branch, suddenly released, rose a little in the dark and grew still. Huai watched it lift. The branch had not chosen the moment. It had simply held the snow until it could hold it no longer, and then it had let the snow go on falling the way snow has always fallen, downward and outward and away, and it had not seemed to grieve the losing of it at all. "Does the branch call the snow back?" the abbot asked, very gently. Huai shook his head. "No," he said. "It only rises." They stood together a while longer in the deepening cold, saying nothing more, and Huai found that he was weeping, quietly, though the weeping no longer felt like the old familiar ache. It felt instead like something very heavy being set down at last upon the ground, where it could finally rest. He went back to his mat that night, and when the last conversation rose in him, as of course it did, he did not begin to rebuild it. He let it be the morning that it had been. He let his younger self be sharp, and tired, and frightened, and human. He let himself be already forgiven by the only one who could have offered the forgiveness, the old man who had looked at him and said nothing, and who had perhaps understood a great deal more than Huai had ever thought to give him credit for. He still missed his teacher. The missing was allowed to stay. It was only the rebuilding that he laid down. And for the first time in a year, before the evening bell had even finished ringing, Wei slept. Notice what the old teacher never did. He never told Huai the better words to say. He never offered him the forgiveness the young monk had been chasing through all those dark hours. He only turned him, quietly, toward what was already true. Huai believed that he was holding a conversation. He believed that if he could only find the right sentence, he might reach back and repair what had gone wrong. But the conversation was gone. What he was truly holding was something else, something closer and far heavier, the wish to have been a gentler man than he was on the hardest morning of his young life. He was holding his own imperfection and calling the holding by the name of love. There is an old teaching, older than that mountain monastery, that says the mind of the past cannot be grasped. Not because we are forbidden to reach for it, but because there is simply nothing there to take hold of. The moment has already moved on. It moved on while we were still standing inside it. And every night we spend reaching back, for it is a night we spend closing our hand around the empty air. No one has ever called an arrow back to the string. No one has ever called the warmth back through an open door. And no one, in all the long history of human aching, has ever once repaired a finished morning by lying awake inside it in the dark. It has already gone. Whatever it was, however it ended, however much you wish it had gone otherwise, it has already gone. Perhaps there is a message on your own phone that you have read far too many times. Perhaps there is a doorway somewhere where you once said goodbye to someone, and you are standing in it still, in your mind, trying and trying to change the last thing that you said. You can stop standing there. Not tonight, perhaps, and not all at once. But you can begin, even now, to let the doorway be empty, and to let yourself walk on. Feel your shoulders, and how long they have been braced against a thing that finished long ago. Let them come down. So, let the reaching rest now. There is nothing you need to fix in the dark. The past is not asking you to relive it. It is only asking, if it asks anything of you at all, to be allowed to stay where it is, finished and quiet, while you go on breathing gently here. Feel the weight of your body against whatever holds you. Feel how the bed, or the chair, or the floor beneath you takes that weight without the smallest effort, the way the still ground takes the falling snow. You do not have to hold yourself up. You do not have to hold anything up at all. Let one slow breath move in, and let it go again without pushing it. Let the next one arrive entirely on its own. High on the mountain, the branch has already risen. It carries nothing now but the cold and the clean night air, and soon more snow will come, and it will hold that too, and then let that go too. And this is simply what the branch has always been for. If sleep should come to you while you listen, let it come. There is nothing further you need to do, and nowhere further you need to go. And yet the heart has more than one way of refusing to let a person go. Kwai had tried to hold a man by rewriting their last words to each other. But there is another kind of holding, quieter, and much harder to see, in which we refuse to let the ones we love become anyone at all other than who they once were for us. That, too, is a weight the branch will one day teach us how to set down. But not yet. For now, there is only this breath, and the next, and rest. And so the young monk learned to let a finished morning stay finished. But there is a gentler trap than the one that caught him, one that does not feel like grief at all while we are living inside it. It feels like love. It feels like loyalty. It is the quiet refusal to let someone we cherish grow past the person they once were, to keep them in our minds, exactly as they were on some warmer and simpler day, and to feel a small ache each time the living person fails to match the one we are still holding. Far to the east of those Chinese mountains, across the winter sea, a woman at a loom knew this ache well, without ever once having a name for it. Think of someone you have loved for a very long time. A child, perhaps, who is grown now and lives their own life in their own way. A friend you have known since you were both young and a little foolish. A parent, or a brother, or the person who sleeps beside you. And notice, if it is true, how often you are speaking not to the person in front of you at all, but to an earlier version of them, one you met years ago and quietly decided was the real one. You expect the old opinions, the old tastes, the old way of laughing. And when they surprise you, when they have changed their mind or grown into something you did not plan for, some small part of you feels it as a loss. You wanted them to stay. You did not notice that in wanting them to stay, you had slowly stopped seeing who they were becoming. And the strange sorrow of it is that they are right there, close enough to touch, and still you feel far away from them. Because the one you keep reaching for is a person who no longer exists, except inside you. The Buddhist teachers spoke often of impermanence, though they did not mean it as a sad thing. They meant that everything that lives is always in the middle of changing. The river and the cloud and the child and the face in the mirror, and that this ceaseless changing is not a flaw in the world, but the very way the world stays alive. To ask a living person to stay the same is to ask a river to stop flowing and yet somehow remain a river. Long ago, in a weaving town in the mountains of old Japan, a mother learned this at her own loom, from the very daughter she believed she had lost. Rain hung low over the wooded hills, graying the far ridges until they seemed to dissolve into the sky. In the town below, water dripped from every eave and gathered in the ruts of the narrow lane. And in a dim room at the back of a weaver's house, where the air smelled of wet hemp and the sharp green bite of the indigo vat, an aging woman named Kiku sat at her loom and passed the shuttle through the threads, back and forth, the way she had passed it for more years than she cared to count. Her hands knew the work without her. The loom was older than her marriage, its wood gone dark and smooth where her palms had rested season after season, and the small clay lamp beside it threw a low, unsteady light across the half-finished cloth. Skeins of hemp thread hung drying along the far wall, still faintly blue at their tips from the vat. What her hands did not know, and what she could not seem to finish, no matter how many seasons she wove, was how to be happy when her daughter came home. Nami was grown now, and married, and lived a full half-day's walk away, in a larger town down by the coast. She came back 3 or 4 times a year, and Kiku waited for those visits the way the dry ground waits for rain. And yet, every single time, Nami would leave again and Kiku would sit back down at her loom, feeling lonelier than she had been before the visit ever came. She did not understand it. She only knew that something always went a little wrong. Some sourness she could not name, and that she was always the one left holding it after her daughter had gone. For Kiku still cooked, on the morning of each visit, the sweet bean dish that Nami had loved as a small girl, though Nami now ate it only to be kind. She still kept the corner where the child had slept exactly as it had once been. The little wooden comb upon the shelf, the first clumsy square of cloth the girl had ever woven, pinned carefully to the wall. And when the grown woman came through the door, tall and sure, and full of opinions about the coast and the markets, and the proper way to set a dye, Kiku would feel a strange disappointment settle over her, as though she had been expecting someone else, and this capable stranger had arrived in that person's place. On this visit, the rain kept them both indoors, and to pass the grey afternoon, Kiku suggested that they weave together, the way they had when Nami was a girl. She meant it as a kindness, but almost at once the old sourness rose in her. Nami threw the weft differently than Kiku had taught her, with a quicker, The looser hand she had learned from some other weaver down on the coast, and the pattern that grew beneath her fingers was not Kiku's pattern at all. It was something new, angular and bright, that Kiku did not know. Kiku reached up and took down the small square of cloth pinned to the wall, the one from Nami's childhood, and laid it on the loom between them. "You used to love this pattern," she said. "You would trace it with your finger until you fell asleep. Why do you never weave it anymore?" Nami looked at the old cloth for a long moment. "Mother," she said gently, "I remember the finger. I do not remember the pattern at all. And I think, if you will forgive me for saying so, that you have been keeping her here all these years. The little one. And every time I come through that door, you look at me, and you cannot find her, and it makes you sad." Kiku felt something tighten in her chest. "You are my daughter," she said, and it came out sharper than she had meant it to. "I am," Nami said, and she did not flinch from it. "I am your daughter, but I am not the daughter in that cloth. She is only thread now, Mother. She has been thread for a very long time. I am the one still breathing, here, in front of you." She reached across the loom and laid her hand over her mother's still hand. "Will you weave with the one who is here?" Kiku did not answer for a while. She looked down at the two of them, at her own worn hand and her daughter's stronger one, and then at the long cloth stretched upon the loom, and something in her slowly began to turn. She saw that the cloth did not end where the childhood square had ended. It had gone on, past the little pattern, row after quiet row, through all the lengths she had woven, while Nami grew and married and moved away, right down into this very afternoon. Into the bright, angular rows her daughter was setting into it now. The child's pattern was still there. It had not been erased. But the cloth had not stopped at the child. It had gone on becoming a woman her mother had not yet met. Through the small window, the rain had thinned away to nothing. On the plum branch, just outside, the last grey crust of the winter's snow slid free of its own weight and dropped into the mud below. And there, where the snow had lain and hidden them all season, Kiku saw quite plainly the first hard green buds waiting on the wood. That evening, for the first time in a great many years, Kiku did not ask her daughter a single question about the past. She asked her instead about the coast. She asked how she had learned that quick, the loose throw of the weft, and who had taught it to her, and whether she might show it to her mother slowly, so that an old pair of hands could try it too. And Nami laughed, "I'm surprised," and took her mother's hands in her own and began to teach. They wove there side by side until the lamp began to gutter, the old pattern and the new one running down together into the length of the same long cloth. And when Nami left the following morning, Kiku sat down at her loom and did not feel lonely at all. Noticed that nothing had truly been taken from Kiku. Her daughter had not gone anywhere. She had been coming home 3 and 4 times a year, whole and alive, and reaching out with both hands. The loss that Kiku felt was not a loss the world had handed to her. It was one she had been quietly weaving for herself, thread by thread, every time she looked at the living woman and searched her face for a child who had finished being a child long ago. This is the strange arithmetic of holding on. We believe that we are keeping someone close, when what we are truly keeping is only a picture of them, a single moment pressed flat and hung upon the wall of the mind. And a picture cannot love you back. A picture cannot surprise you. or grow, or reach across a loom and rest its warm hand upon yours. Only the living person can do that, and the living person is always someone slightly new. Everything that is alive is in the middle of becoming. The teachers did not offer us this to frighten us. They offered it as a kind of mercy. For if the ones we love are always changing, then we have not truly lost the child who is gone. That child became the very person sitting before us now. Nothing at all was subtracted. It was only carried forward into a shape we had not yet learned how to see. Perhaps there is someone in your own life you keep meeting as the person they used to be. A grown child, an old friend, the one across the table you fell in love with a long time ago. Tonight you do not have to solve any of it. You might simply let one of them be new. Let them be who they are now, and not who they were then. Meet the one who is here. Feel your hands, which may have been holding a shape that no longer quite fits them. And let your fingers open a little in the dark. So let the loom rest now, and let your hands rest along with it. There is no one you need to hold in place tonight. The people you love are allowed to go on becoming, even while you sleep, even while you are not there to watch, and they will still be themselves in the morning, only a little further along their way. Feel how your body has settled into whatever holds it. Notice the small loosening in your hands, in your jaw, in the soft space between your brows, as though you had been gripping a single thread for a very long time and have only now let it slip free of your fingers. There is nothing to weave in the dark. There is nothing you must keep the same. Let one breath move through you slowly, and let it change you, just a little, the way that every breath so quietly does. And then let the next one come. Outside, on some branch you cannot see, the old snow has slipped away, and the buds it had been hiding are opening into the dark, in their own time, asking no one at all for permission. If sleep is near now, let it take you. You do not have to hold the whole of the day together any longer, for we have looked, these 2 nights, at the people and the moments that the heart will not release. But there is a harder thing still that we go on gripping in the dark, long after it has stopped doing us any good. Not something we love, something that was done to us, once, and never made right. That, too, can be laid down, but gently, and not yet. For now, there is only rest. The mother at her loom had been holding someone she loved, but the heart can close its hand just as tightly around someone it does not love at all. There is a particular kind of holding that feels less like sorrow and more like a small, cold fire we tend in the chest, feeding it in the dark. I'm certain that as long as it goes on burning, we have not surrendered. We have not forgotten. We have not let them get away with it. And far across the mountains, in more than one country, more than one weary soul sat up late into the night, tending exactly such a fire. You may know the fire, I mean. Someone hurt you once. Perhaps they lied to you, or betrayed you, or took something that was yours, or simply turned away in the very moment you most needed them to stay. And they never said that they were sorry. They may not even know, or care, that the wound is still there. But you know. And some nights, when the room is dark and there is nothing left to keep you from your own thoughts, you find yourself back inside it, rehearsing what you would say to them if they ever admitted what they had done. You imagine the apology. You imagine how you might finally rest, once they have said the words. And so you wait. You have been waiting for those words for a year, or for 10 years, or for half of your whole life. You tell yourself that you are waiting for justice, for fairness, for the wrong to be set right at last. But the one who hurt you is sleeping soundly somewhere far away. And you are the one still awake, still tending the small, cold fire, still paying, every single night, a debt that was never yours to pay. The teachers had a plain and difficult word for this. They said that anger held too long stops being something that has happened to us and becomes something we do to ourselves, over and over, long after the one who wronged us has walked away. Long ago, in the mountains of Song, China, a man climbed a temple path carrying such a fire, certain he was carrying a righteous thing, and an old monk showed him quietly whose hand the fire was truly burning. The autumn mountains were the color of rust and old gold, and a thin mist moved between the pines below the temple. Along the stone path that climbed toward the gate, a merchant named Cheng made his way upward. His good silk robe darkened at the hem with dust, his jaw set hard against the cold. He had not come up the mountain in search of peace. He had come because a friend had told him the old monk here could see to the heart of any wrong, and Cheng wanted, more than he wanted almost anything else in the world, to hear a wise man say aloud that he had been wronged. Years before, his partner, a man he had trusted as he would a brother, had cheated him out of nearly everything, had spread lies about him through the market, and had walked away rich while Cheng began his life again from nothing. The partner had never once apologized. He lived still down in the valley, prosperous and untroubled, and it was this, far more than the lost money, that Cheng could not forgive. He had rebuilt his fortune over the years. He had never once rebuilt his sleep. The old monk received him in a bare room where a single stick of incense burned, and he listened to the whole long history without a word, nodding now and then. When Cheng had finished at last, breathless, waiting to be told that he was right, the monk stayed quiet for a long time. "Tell me," the old man said finally, "this man who wronged you, how does he sleep at night?" Cheng blinked. "I do not know," he said. "Well enough, I suppose. He has forgotten me entirely." "And you," said the monk, "how is it that you sleep?" Cheng's face grew hot. "I do not sleep," he said. "I lie awake. I think of what he did to me. I think of what I will say to him when he finally admits it." The old monk nodded slowly, as though some difficult thing had at last come clear to him. "So he did you a wrong once, many years ago," the monk said, "and it was over within a single season. And every night since then, you have risen up from your bed and done that same wrong to yourself all over again. He struck you a single blow. You have struck yourself 10,000 times in his name and called it justice." Cheng opened his mouth to protest and found that he had nothing at all to say. "There is an old teaching," the monk went on, gently now. "If a man brings you a gift and you refuse to take it, the gift stays with the one who brought it. His anger was a gift he tried to hand to you long ago. You have been carrying it up and down this mountain ever since, as though it belonged to you. It never did. You may set it down the moment you are ready. Outside the window, a pine bough, heavy with the season's first wet snow, bent slowly and let its white weight slide free and rose again into the grey air, unburdened. Cheng watched it for a long moment. He had built a small, cold house out of one old rong, and he had been living inside it, alone, for far longer than the wrong itself had taken to happen. He walked back down the mountain that evening, lighter than he had climbed it, though nothing at all in the valley had changed. The partner had still not apologized. He never would. And for the first time in years, it no longer seemed to matter quite so much. Notice that the old monk never told Cheng he had not been wronged. He had been wronged. The betrayal was real, and the missing apology was real, and none of it was pretended away. The monk only asked a simpler question. Who is holding the fire now? This is the quiet cruelty of a grievance we will not set down. The person who hurt us once. But resentment asks us to do their work for them, over and over, every night, striking the old blow again with our own hand. We believe we are keeping the wound open so that justice can one day find it. In truth, we are only keeping ourselves from healing, and calling that refusal a kind of loyalty to our own pain. No apology has ever traveled backward through time to unmake the thing it was owed for. Perhaps you are waiting for one tonight. Perhaps there are words you have needed to hear for a very long time, and the person who owes them to you will never, ever say them. You do not have to hold the wound open on their behalf. Let the words you are waiting for be words you will simply never hear, and let that be, at last, the end of the waiting. You hold the fire now. Feel your jaw, and how long it has been clenched around all that unspoken argument, and let it soften. But knowing that a fire burns only the one who keeps it is not always enough to make the hand come open. For sometimes, we hold the flame not out of anger at all, but out of love, believing that to let it die would be to betray someone we could not save. Far to the east, in the mountains of old Korea, a woman climbed a temple path of her own, once in every year, carrying something she was certain she had no right to lay down. Her name was Sunwa, and she was a widow. Each year, on the day that her husband had died, she climbed to the small mountain temple above her village to light incense for him. But she carried a second thing up the path as well, as faithfully as she carried the incense, the memory of the neighbor whose false word, years before, had shamed her husband, cost the family its one small field, and broken something in him that never mended before he died. The neighbor had never apologized, and Sunhua had promised herself, standing at her husband's grave, that she never would forgive him, because forgiving felt like telling her husband that all his suffering had not mattered in the least. An old woman tended the temple grounds, a widow herself, who had swept those cold stones for longer than anyone could remember. She had watched Sunhua climb the path each year, and each year go back down more bent than she had come up. This year, as Sunhua knelt before the incense, the old woman sat down quietly beside her. "You bring him something heavy every year," the old woman said. "Heavier than incense. I bring him my faithfulness." Sunhua answered, "I have not forgiven the man who ruined him. I never will. It is all that I have left to give my husband now." The old woman was quiet for a moment. "Tell me," she said, "when your husband died, did he take his anger with him, or did he leave it here for you?" Sunwa's throat tightened. He was tired. At the end, she admitted. He said he was too tired to go on hating anyone. He said he only wanted to rest. Then he set it down. The old woman said softly, "Before ever he left you. And you have carried his fire for years, believing that it keeps him warm somewhere. But the dead do not warm themselves at the fire we keep burning for them. They have gone somewhere the cold can no longer reach. He is resting. You are the only one of the two of you still standing out here in the snow." Above them, the snow slid from the temple eaves in a soft white rush and vanished into the waiting ground, and the bare branch beneath let go of its last white handful and lifted, ever so slightly, toward the pale sky. Sunwa watched it, and something in her chest, held rigid for so many years, began at last to give way. She lit her incense that day for her husband, and she did not speak the neighbor's name aloud. And when she came back down the mountain, she found that setting the grievance down had not erased a single thing her husband had suffered. It had only stopped her from suffering it forever in his place. The merchant believed his anger was a sword he held against the man who had wronged him. The widow believed her anger was a candle she kept lit for the man she had loved. Yet both of them were doing the very same thing, and both were paying the very same price. Each had been struck once, long ago, by something they did not choose, and each had gone on, night after night, driving the same arrow deeper with their own two hands. The teachers spoke of this as a second arrow. The first arrow is the thing that happens to us, the betrayal, the loss, the word that should never have been spoken. That arrow we do not choose and cannot always avoid. But the second arrow is the one we fire into ourselves, again and again, every time we return to the wound and reopen it. Every time we lie awake rehearsing an injury we have already survived. The first arrow belongs to the world. The second arrow is always only our own. To set a grievance down is not to say the wrong was small. It is not to forgive the unforgivable, or to pretend the wound was never made. It is only to stop firing the second arrow. It is to let the first wound be the only wound, and to allow it, finally, to begin to close. You hold the fire now, and you may also, whenever you are ready, simply let it go out. So let the fire go quiet now. You do not have to keep it burning through the night. No one is warmed by it. No wrong is undone by it. It asks only to be fed, and you are allowed, tonight, to stop feeding it, and to rest. Feel the weight of your body sinking into the dark, and notice how much lighter you grow the moment you stop carrying what was never yours to carry. Let your hands lie open. Let your jaw and your shoulders and the tight space behind your eyes release the old argument you have made 1,000 times and never once won. There is nothing to defend here in the dark. There is no one who needs answering. Let one slow breath carry a little of the heat away, and let the next breath come cooler still. High on the mountain, the branches have let their snow fall, and they stand now in the still night, holding nothing at all, and they do not seem to miss the weight of it. If sleep is near, let it come and settle over you like new snow. For we have spoken of the fires we keep for those who wronged us, and for those we have lost. But the heart grips one thing still more quietly than any grievance: the person we used to be, the name we long answered to, the place we once held in the world that is closed behind us without asking. That, too, is a weight the branches will teach us how to set down. But softly, and not tonight. For now, there is only rest. The widow on the mountain path had learned to let her grievance go cold. But there is a fire that burns even quieter than resentment, and far harder to name, because it does not feel like anger or even like grief. It feels like simply being who we are. It is the name we have answered to for so long that we no longer remember choosing it. The role that once cost us everything to earn, and that we now cannot imagine setting down. Even when the world around us has quietly stopped asking us to carry it. Perhaps you know this in a smaller way than temples and titles. The parent whose children no longer need waking, or feeding, or watching over in the night, and who lies awake now wondering who she is if not the one who is needed. The worker who built something with his own hands for 30 years, who knew every corner of that labor better than he knew his own reflection, and who finds, on the far side of it, that his hands no longer know what to do with an ordinary evening. That the silence after retirement feels less like rest and more like a room he has wandered into by mistake. The one who was always the strong one, the capable one, the one everybody leaned on, and who has never once let anybody see what it costs to keep standing up straight, and who does not know, if the leaning ever stopped, whether there would be anything left standing at all. We build a self out of a role, over years, out of real effort and real sacrifice. And then the role ends, gently or all at once, and we are left holding a name that no longer quite fits the shape of our days. And rather than feel the strange lightness of being free of it, we grip it tighter, afraid that if we are not that name any longer, we may not be anyone at all. The old teachers understood that the self we build through our labor is a real thing, and also a temporary one, no truer or more permanent than any other shape water takes on its way to the sea. Long ago, in the hills, above an old capital in Japan, a woman who had spent her whole life building a self out of being first, and being needed, and being the one who had endured what no one else had endured, discovered in the quiet of her own old age that even this had to be set down. The convent stood on a wooded rise above the old capital, its wooden halls silvered with age, its garden holding the last soft light of an autumn evening. Somewhere below the rise, temple bells from the city drifted up, faint and irregular on the cooling air, and closer by, a stream that fed the convent's small pond made its own quiet, unhurried sound over the stones. Along the swept veranda that looked out over that garden sat the abbess Nyodai, very old now. Her spine no longer quite as straight as it once had been, her hands folded loosely in her lap, watching a wind move through the branches of a great pine that had stood in that courtyard since before the convent itself was built. She had founded this place with her own 2 hands. Against a resistance she still remembered in every detail, the cold formality of the monks who had refused to acknowledge her, the years spent traveling roads, where a woman in a nun's robe was met with suspicion rather than welcome. When she had first sought to lead, the monks of her order had refused to accept a woman among their teachers, no matter what her own teacher, dying, had named her. She had argued for that place at every turn, had endured what she rarely spoke of, even to her closest students, and had built here at last a house of her own where women could study without asking anyone's permission to belong. It had taken the whole of her strength, sustained across decades, and it had become, without her quite noticing, the entire shape of who she believed herself to be. She was not simply a nun. She was the founder, the first, the one who had endured. Tomorrow, at dawn, a ceremony would be held to name her successor, a younger nun called Eshin, careful and clear-eyed, and already, in truth, more capable of running the convent's daily affairs than Nyodai now was. Nyodai had chosen her herself, had trained her patiently across many long winters, correcting her posture, her breath, her understanding, and wanted nothing more, she told herself, than to see her succeed. And still, sitting on the veranda this last evening before the hand was formally passed, the old abbess found that she could not stop a small, cold dread from moving through her chest, and she did not fully understand what it was that frightened her, until Eshin came quietly and sat down at her side. "You have not eaten this evening," Eshin said gently. "Are you troubled about tomorrow?" Nyodai was quiet for a long moment, watching the low sun move through the pine. "I built all of this," she said at last, "with my own hands, against men who did not want it built. And tomorrow you will stand where I have stood, and they will bow to you, and I will simply be an old woman on a veranda, watching." Eshin considered this carefully before she spoke. "You built a door," she said. "You did not build yourself into the doorway forever. That was never the purpose of it. But without me," Nyodai said, her voice catching slightly on a feeling she had not expected to feel, "who will they say that we are?" "They will say what we have always truly been," Eshin answered. "A place where the practice continues, not a place named forever after the one who happens to be missing from it now." Nyodai turned to look at her, slowly, and for a long moment said nothing at all. Above them, in the failing light, the lowest bough of the old pine, the very branch that had shaded the convent gate through every one of its 40 years, gave a soft, dry crack and let go, falling at last to the moss below, spent and finished. Neither woman moved to clear it away. The tree itself did not seem to notice its going. Its higher branches went on holding the last of the evening light exactly as they had a moment before. "Does it grieve the branch?" Nyodai asked quietly, more to herself than to Eshin. "I do not think a tree grieves what it no longer needs in order to keep growing," Eshin said. "I think it simply lets it fall, and goes on reaching upward with whatever remains." Nyodai looked at the fallen branch for a long while, and something in her chest that had been clenched since morning slowly began to loosen. She had spent 40 years teaching young women that nothing continues by staying the same shape forever, and only now, on this quiet veranda, did she understand that she herself had never truly believed her own teaching, not down in the part of her that still needed, even at the very end of her life, to be the one who was first, and needed, and irreplaceable. At dawn the following morning, Nyodai sat at the back of the hall, an old woman among many, her robe drawn close against the early chill, and watched Eshin receive the robe and the bow of the assembly with a calm she herself had never quite managed to feel on the day she had received it. And to her own quiet surprise, what rose in Nyodai's chest as she watched was not grief at all. It was something closer to the lightness of a hand finally opened after holding, for a very long time, a weight it no longer needed to prove itself by carrying. Notice what Eshin never did. She never told the old abbess that her life's work had not mattered. It had mattered enormously. The door Nyodai had built had let in decades of women who would otherwise have been shut out entirely. But the door was not the same thing as the woman who had built it, and the convent was not the same thing as the founder's continued presence within its walls. And Nyodai had quietly confused the two for so long that she had not noticed the confusion until the evening it was finally lifted from her. This is how a role becomes a cage without our ever choosing it to be one. We labor at something. We sacrifice for it. We come to be known by it. And slowly, without any single decisive moment, the labor becomes the whole of who we believe ourselves to be. Then life asks, as it always eventually asks, that we set the role down through retirement, or age, or a child who no longer needs tending, or a body that can no longer do the work it once did. And we mistake the setting down for a kind of dying, when it is very often only the tree letting go of a branch it no longer requires in order to keep on reaching toward the light. There is a particular kind of fear that hides inside this holding, one Nyodai herself had never named until that last evening on the veranda. It is the fear that our worth was never truly ours at all, but only on loan to us for as long as we kept performing the role that seemed to earn it. If the title falls away, the fear whispers, perhaps the worth falls away with it. But a title is only ever a door someone built so that a life could pass through it. The life passing through was always the truer thing, quietly present before the door was built, and quietly present after the door has been left behind for someone else to hold open. You were never only the role. You were the one doing the work, underneath the doing of it, all along. Whatever it is that you built, whatever name you have long answered to, whatever place you fear becoming invisible without, you were there before it, and something of you remains after it, quiet and whole and entirely worthy of rest. Perhaps there is a title you have quietly stopped fitting into, a version of yourself that used to be needed in a way you no longer are. You do not have to be the one who is needed tonight. You are allowed, simply, to be the one who is here. Feel the muscles across your chest, which may have been holding themselves at attention for a role that finished its work some time ago, and let them stand down at last. So let the old name rest tonight. There is no ceremony you must perform in the dark, no title to defend, nothing you need prove yourself worthy of before you are allowed to close your eyes. Whatever you built with your years, it is built. It stands, whether or not you continue holding it upright with your own two tired arms. Feel your body settle further into whatever holds it, heavier now than it was even a few moments ago. Let your hands, which have done so much careful work across so many years, simply lie still and unoccupied, asking nothing of themselves. Let one breath come, easy and unearned, the way the young pine needles will come again in spring without anyone appointing them to the task. And let the next breath follow, just as freely. Somewhere, an old branch lies quietly on quiet moss, softened already by the night's first dew, and the tree above it has not stopped growing for the losing of it. If sleep draws near, let it come the same simple way, without your needing to have finished anything first, without your needing to be anyone at all in order to deserve it. We have spoken now of the words we cannot call back, and the people we will not let change, and the grievances we keep alight, and the names we no longer quite fit. There is one more shape this holding often takes, quieter still, and perhaps closer to your own heart than any of the others. The future we have already decided must arrive a certain way, and the fear that lives inside our need to control it. That, too, waits for us, gently, further down this long and unhurried night. But not yet. For now, only rest. The old abbess had learned to let a title go without growing bitter about the letting. But there is a mistake that waits on the far side of every teaching we have visited tonight. Some hearts cannot release what they are holding and stay bound by it for years. Other hearts release too hard, and in their hurry to be free, let go of warmth along with the weight, mistaking the resulting numbness for wisdom. Tonight we walk beside one of each. First, a fisherman on a river in old Vietnam who could not set down a boat. And after him, a young monk high in the mountains of Tibet who set down far more than he meant to. You have perhaps met both of these people in your own life, or been each of them yourself in different seasons. There is the one who keeps the room exactly as it was, the coat still hanging by the door, the chair no one else is permitted to sit in, unable to move a single object because moving it would mean admitting the person is truly gone. And there is the other one, who decides, after enough pain, that the safest thing is simply to stop feeling so much, to love a little less, so it will hurt a little less next time, to keep everyone at a careful, managed distance, and call this peace, when what it truly is, quietly, is fear wearing the color of wisdom. The old teachers spoke of a particular quality of heart, a spaciousness that holds all things, welcome and unwelcome alike, without being knocked over by any of them. But they were careful to distinguish this spaciousness from indifference, because the two can look, from the outside, almost identical, and only the heart itself knows which one it is standing inside. Long ago, on a river delta in old Vietnam, and later, high in the mountains of Tibet, two very different people discovered the difference the hard way. The river ran low and brown in the dry season, sliding past reed banks, where herons stood motionless in the early light, and the whole delta smelled of mud and salt, and the green sharpness of rice shoots pushing up in the flooded fields beyond. Down at the water's edge, tied to a post that had gone soft and grey with years of weather, sat a small wooden boat, its paint long since peeled away. Its hull settled deep into the silt, where it had not moved in longer than anyone in the village cared to count. The boat had belonged to a woman named Lien, and to her husband, a fisherman named Kiem, who had worked that river together for 11 years, before the river took her in a sudden flood no one had seen coming. Kiem had not fished from that boat since. He had bought himself a smaller one, and left the old boat tied exactly where she had last stepped out of it, and every single evening, on his way back from the day's work, he stopped beside it for a while before he went home. His neighbors had stopped asking him to move it years ago. It leaned further into the mud each season, and weeds had begun to grow up through the gaps in its planking, and still Kiem would not let anyone touch it, not to repair it, not to burn it for firewood, not even to right it when a storm knocked it further onto its side. The boat had not moved in 3 years, and neither, in all that time, had he. An old monk from the small pagoda upriver used to pass that spot on his way to the market, and one evening, finding Kiem sitting there as always in the failing light, he sat down on the bank beside him without being asked. "You keep this boat very carefully," the monk said, "for something you never use." It was hers, Kiem said. If I let it go, then she is only mud and memory. As long as the boat sits here, some small part of what we had together still exists in the world. The monk considered this for a while, watching a heron lift off from the far bank and cross the reddening sky. Tell me, he said, when you sit beside this boat each evening, do you feel closer to her or further away? Kiem opened his mouth to answer quickly, and then closed it again, surprised by his own hesitation. Further, he admitted finally, I feel her less here than I do anywhere else. It is only wood now. It stopped being her a long time ago. Then perhaps, the monk said gently, it was never the boat you were trying to keep. Perhaps it was the day you lost her, and you have been trying, all this time, to keep that single terrible evening from ever finishing. But an evening cannot be held in place by a boat, any more than a river can be held in place by a post driven into its bank. The river still runs beneath it. It has simply been asked to run around one stubborn, sinking thing. Above them, on the pagoda roof, visible over the tree line, the last of that season's dry snow, unusual so far south and already thinning, slid free of the tiles in the evening warmth and dissolved before it ever reached the ground. Kiem watched it go, and something in his chest, held tight for 3 long years, loosened by the smallest possible degree. He did not burn the boat the next morning, or the morning after that. But within the month, he asked 2 of his neighbors to help him haul it up onto the bank, and he sat with Lien's memory there in the open air rather than at the water's edge. And slowly, over the following season, he began teaching a young nephew how to mend nets in the boat's shade, and found that Lien felt, if anything, nearer to him there than she ever had beside the sinking hull. Noticed that the old monk never told Kiem to stop grieving, or to feel less than he felt. He only asked a single honest question, and let Kiem discover for himself that the boat had stopped being a bridge to her and had become, instead, a wall between himself and the rest of his own life. But grief that will not release its grip is only half of this particular danger. There is another mistake that hides on the far side of the very teaching we have spent this whole night exploring, and it can be harder to see, because from a certain angle, it looks like success rather than failure. High in the mountains of Tibet, in a small monastery perched above a valley where yak bells rang faintly in the thin cold air, there lived a young monk named Tenzin, who had lost his mother 2 winters before, and had decided, in the aftermath of that loss, that the surest way to end his suffering was to stop caring quite so much about anyone at all. He had read the teachings on non-attachment carefully, and had concluded, in the particular way that grief sometimes reasons, that if loving deeply was what had caused him such pain, then loving less deeply must be the cure. He grew cool and formal, even with his own younger sister, Yudron, who walked up from the valley twice each season to see him, bringing butter and news of home. Where he had once embraced her warmly at the gate, he now offered her only a calm nod, a brief blessing, a few careful words about the weather on the pass. He believed, quite sincerely, that he was practicing equanimity. He told himself he had finally understood what the teachings meant. An old nun named Ani Dolma, who had lived at the monastery longer than anyone could remember, watched this change in him across 2 full years, and on the morning of Yudron's most recent visit, after the girl had gone back down the mountain, looking smaller and more uncertain than she had climbing up it. The old nun found Tenzin alone at his prayers and sat down across from him. "Your sister climbs a very steep path twice a year to see you," Ani Dolma said. "And each time, you send her back down with a little less than she brought up. I have simply let go of my attachment to her," Tenzin said, with the particular firmness of a man defending something he is not entirely certain of. "I do not grasp at people the way I once did. Is that not what we are taught?" The old nun studied him for a long moment. "Tell me," she said, "when she embraced you at the gate, all those years ago, before your mother died, did your heart break a little when she left again down the mountain?" Tenzin's jaw tightened. "Yes," he admitted. "Every time." "And now?" the nun asked. "Does your heart break now, when she leaves?" He was quiet for a while. "No," he said finally, very softly, as though hearing the truth of it for the first time. "It does not break at all anymore." "Then you have not released your grasping," Ani Dolma said. "You have simply built a wall so fine that even your own love cannot find the door in it. Equanimity does not mean the heart stops breaking. It means the heart can break, fully, every single time, and still remain open enough to welcome the next embrace. What you have built is not peace. It is a smaller room to suffer quietly inside, where at least no one can see the suffering happening. Outside the small window, a strand of prayer flags strung between two poles lifted and settled in the thin mountain wind. Their colors faded nearly to white by years of sun and snow, and a fresh dusting of the season's first snow slid from the sloped roof above and scattered into the cold morning air. Tenzin watched it fall and felt, for the first time in 2 years, something in his chest give way that he had not known was so tightly held. When Yudron climbed the mountain again at the next season's turning, Tenzin met her at the gate the old way, and held her a moment longer than was strictly proper for a monk, and felt his heart, unguarded now, ache with the whole plain sweetness of missing her, and did not try to stop the ache from arriving. The fisherman had refused to let a single boat go, believing that release would mean the final loss of everything it stood for. The young monk had let go of far too much, believing that numbness was the same thing as freedom. Yet underneath their very different mistakes lay the very same fear that love, once it is allowed to move, might simply disappear. Kiem feared that setting the boat down would erase his wife completely. Tenzin feared that loving his sister fully would leave him exposed to a grief he could not survive twice. Both were wrong in the very same way, though from opposite directions. The old teachers called the quality Tenzin was reaching for a spacious heart, one that holds joy and sorrow both without clutching at either. But a spacious heart is not an empty one. It is not a heart that has learned to feel less. It is a heart large enough to feel everything fully, the ache of the goodbye and the warmth of the welcome both, without needing either one to stay forever in order to have been real. Coldness is not peace wearing a plain robe. Coldness is only fear that has learned to hold very, very still. To let something go is not to stop loving it. It is to stop needing it to remain exactly as it was in order to go on loving it fully. The boat could have been released without releasing Lien. The embrace at the gate could have stayed warm without becoming a wound. Somewhere between gripping too tightly and letting go too coldly, there is a way of holding that is soft enough to move with, and warm enough to still be called love. Perhaps you have built a wall of your own somewhere, mistaking distance for peace. mistaking a quieter heart for a healed one. You do not have to keep the wall standing tonight. Feel the space just behind your ribs, where warmth is allowed to live without needing anything in return, and let it soften, just slightly, toward whoever you have been keeping carefully at arm's length. So let both kinds of holding rest now, the tight fist and the closed door alike. There is a middle way between them that asks nothing more of you tonight than a single open breath. You do not have to decide, in the dark, whether you have been gripping too hard or feeling too little. You only have to let this one breath come all the way in and let it go all the way out, without building anything around it at all. Feel your chest rise and fall beneath whatever covers you, soft and unguarded, the way it did before the world ever taught you to protect it. There is nothing you need to wall off tonight, and nothing you need to hold on to so tightly that your own hand grows tired from the gripping. Let your fingers uncurl, just slightly, into the dark. High on that same cold mountain, the prayer flags move gently in a wind too small to see, and the snow that fell this evening will not stay upon the roof for long. If sleep is drawing near, let it come the same unguarded way, neither grasped at nor pushed away. We have looked, across these 5 nights, at the hands that will not open and the hearts that close too hard to protect themselves from ever opening again. Tomorrow we turn towards something gentler, still a light that someone kept burning, faithfully, for a return that never came, and what it finally meant to let that particular flame simply be what it always was. Tenzin learned that a heart could break gently, again and again, and still remain open at the gate. But there is one more shape that holding often takes, gentler than grief, gentler than resentment, and harder still to recognize, because it wears the face of devotion. It is the small flame we keep burning for someone's return, faithfully, for so many years that the keeping of the flame quietly becomes the whole of the point. Long after the return itself has stopped being the true reason we light it. You may know a version of this waiting. A chair kept at the table for a guest who stopped coming. A door left unlocked past the hour anyone was ever going to walk through it. A ritual performed each evening, half out of love and half out of habit, for someone who may never again be in a position to notice that it was performed at all. Perhaps it is smaller than a missing son. Perhaps it is a phone kept charged all night for a call that never comes. Or a version of your own future you have been quietly holding open, unwilling to close that door, even as the years move past it. And somewhere inside that faithful waiting, a quiet question begins to grow, though we rarely let ourselves ask it aloud. Am I doing this out of love? Or am I doing this because stopping would mean admitting that what I am waiting for may never come? It is a hard question to sit with, because the waiting has so often kept us company through years when very little else did, and to set it down can feel, at first, like losing the last thread that still connects us to what we lost. The old teachers drew a careful distinction between hope that clings to an outcome and a kind of goodwill that asks for nothing in return at all. The first kind of hope is a rope tied to the future, and every day the future does not arrive the way we pictured it. The rope pulls a little at the heart, and the pulling can go on for years without our ever noticing the shape of the cord. The second kind does not need the future to arrive in any particular form in order to be complete. It gives fully, in the present moment, and lets the receiving of it be entirely someone else's concern. asking no promise in exchange for its warmth. On the southern coast of Old Ceylon, in a small fishing village where the sea and the sky met in the same soft grey each evening, a woman named Sumana tended a flame for many years before she came to understand which kind of flame it truly was. The village sat where a slow green river gave itself over to the sea, its brackish water turning the colour of tea in the last of the light. And in the evenings, when the fishing boats came home dragging long shadows across the wet sand, a small shrine stood beneath an old Bodhi tree at the edge of the temple grounds. Its roots had cracked and lifted the stone platform around it over the decades, and its broad leaves hung motionless in the heavy evening air, waiting, like everything else in that hour, for the first cool breath of the coming night. Somewhere behind the temple wall a gong sounded once, low and unhurried, and the smell of the day's incense still clung faintly to the warm stone. Sumana came to that shrine every single evening at dusk, without fail, and lit a small clay lamp filled with coconut oil, and set it carefully among the dozens of others already burning there in long, uneven rows, their small flames trembling slightly whenever the sea wind found its way up through the temple grounds. She had been coming for 11 years, since the evening her son Nimol, 17, and furious about something neither of them could clearly name anymore. I had walked down to the harbour and taken passage on a trading ship bound north, and had never once written home. She lit the lamp, she told herself, and told her neighbours, so that Nimol would always have a light to find his way home by, should he ever decide to return, whatever distant port or road he might be walking at that very hour. The other villagers had long since stopped asking after him, but Sumana came every evening, rain or dry season, and knelt at the shrine and touched the small flame into life, and watched it settle into its steady burning before she allowed herself to walk back up the sandy path to her empty house. The old monk who tended the temple grounds, a man named Ananda, who had watched her light that same lamp for over a decade. He found her one evening sitting a little longer than usual before the shrine, her face drawn and tired in a way he had not seen before. The other lamps around hers had already been lit and left to their steady burning, and the last fishing boats of the evening were only now becoming visible as small dark shapes against the greying water. "You have kept this lamp faithfully for a great many years," he said, settling down onto the low stone step beside her, his knees stiff from age and long sitting. 11, she said, without needing to count. "I light it every evening so that if he ever comes back to the harbour after dark, he will see it burning and know the way home." Ananda watched the small flame a while before he spoke again, his weathered hands folded loosely in his lap, his old eyes reflecting the same small light that danced along the whole uneven row of lamps before them. "Do you light it for his return?" he asked gently, "or for your love of him?" Sumana looked at him, surprised by the question, as though it had never once occurred to her that the two might be different things at all. "Are they not the same thing?" she said. "They were, perhaps, in the beginning," the old monk answered. "But tell me honestly, if he never comes back to this harbour, not this year, not in 10 years, not ever, has the lighting of this lamp been wasted?" Her throat tightened, and for a long moment she could not answer him at all. "Then I will have wasted a great deal of oil," she said finally, her voice unsteady, "for absolutely nothing." "Or," Ananda said, very softly, "you will have loved your son faithfully for the whole rest of your life. in the one way still left open to you, and his returning or not returning will simply never have been the true measure of the gift. The flame does not know that it is waiting for anyone. It only knows how to burn. It has been giving its whole light to the dark every single evening for 11 years, regardless of who has or has not walked past it to see, asking no one's permission to keep on shining. Above them, the last low bough of the old Bodhi tree, heavy with a season's dust that the evening's first light rain had turned briefly to a fine grey film, released its held moisture in a soft scattering shower as the wind moved through, and for a moment the small flame guttered and then steadied itself again and burned on exactly as it had before. Sumana looked at the lamp for a long time after that, the small flame steady now that the wind had settled. She did not stop coming to the shrine. She came the very next evening, and the evening after that, for the rest of her long life. But something in the coming had quietly changed. She no longer knelt there, straining her eyes toward the dark harbor road, listening for a particular set of footsteps on the sand. She simply lit the lamp and watched it catch, and let its small, steady light be entirely enough on its own, a gift complete in the very moment of its giving, owing nothing to any future it might or might not one day illuminate. In time, the neighbors said, she seemed lighter for it, though none of them could quite say why an old woman who had lost her only son should seem, in her last years, so unaccountably at peace. Notice that Ananda never told Sumana to stop hoping her son might return. Hope was never the thing he asked her to release. He only asked her to notice which part of the ritual was love, and which part was a rope tied hopefully to a future she could not control, and to see that the second part had been quietly strangling the first for 11 long years without her ever intending it to, the way a vine will slowly choke the very tree it climbed for support. This is one of the gentlest and most easily missed forms of holding on. It rarely looks like grasping. It looks like faithfulness, like devotion, like love that simply will not quit. And in truth, it often begins as exactly that. But somewhere along the way, without any single dramatic turn, the waiting can start to matter more than the giving, and we come to need the outcome in order to feel that the years of tending were worth anything at all. The tending itself was always worth everything. It never once required an outcome to justify it. There is a particular ache in loving someone who cannot, or will not, receive that love directly, and the temptation is always to measure the love by whether it ever finds its way home. But love measured only by its reception is a fragile thing, entirely at the mercy of another person's choices, another person's silence, another person's road not taken back toward you. Love given simply because it is what your heart knows how to do, regardless of what becomes of it afterward, cannot be taken from you by anyone's absence. Sumana had spent 11 years believing her love depended on Nimal's eventual footsteps on the sand. It had never depended on anything of the kind. You may be keeping some small flame of your own tonight, for a person, a hope, a version of your life that has not yet arrived and may never arrive in quite the shape you have been picturing. The flame does not need that shape in order to be real, or good, or enough. It only needs your willingness to keep giving it your light, one evening at a time, without asking the darkness in advance what it intends to do with the gift. So let the waiting soften now, even as the flame itself may continue to burn. You do not have to know tonight whether what you are hoping for will ever arrive. You only have to notice that the hoping and the loving are two different things, and that you are always free to keep the second even on the nights you finally set the first one down. Feel your throat, which may have grown tight from years of straining to hear a particular sound in the distance, and let it loosen. Feel the whole soft weight of your body now, low and unhurried against whatever holds you. There is nothing arriving tonight that you need to watch for. There is no road to keep your eyes upon in the dark. Let your eyes close all the way, without checking one more time, without listening for one more set of footsteps that may or may not ever come. Let one breath move in, asking nothing of the night ahead, and let it move out again, complete in itself. Exactly as a small flame is complete in itself the moment it catches, regardless of who is walking toward it or away. Somewhere on a quiet shore, a lamp is burning beneath an old and patient tree, giving its light to the dark simply because that is what a lamp was always for, and it does not trouble itself tonight with who may or may not be coming to see it. If sleep is near, let it come the same complete way, needing no return, no arrival, no proof that the waiting was worthwhile. We have looked across 6 long turns of this quiet night at the many shapes a closed hand can take. Tomorrow the ground beneath us shifts, gently, from the holding itself towards something larger and more spacious still. A question about who we even are underneath everything we have been so carefully holding on to. But not yet. For now, only the lamp, only the breath, only rest. Sumana let the flame simply be a flame, asking nothing further of the dark. But there is a question that waits quietly beneath every story we have told so far tonight. One that has nothing to do with what we are holding, and everything to do with who, exactly, is doing the holding. For sometimes the thing we cannot release is not a memory, or a person, or a hope, but the very self we have built our whole identity around. A self stitched together, thread by thread, out of a single old wound. Perhaps you have met someone who introduces themselves, sooner or later, by way of the worst thing that ever happened to them. The betrayal, the illness, the parent who was cruel, or absent, or both. And perhaps, if you are honest with yourself in this quiet hour, you recognize the pattern in your own life as well. Some wound so old and so central that it has become less a memory and more a kind of headquarters. The place from which every other story about yourself now seems to begin. I am the one who was wronged. I am the one who was left. I am the one who never got what she deserved. It becomes, without our ever choosing it, the whole shape of the house we live inside, and we furnish every room of our days according to its dimensions, without ever asking whether a different house might have been available to us all along. There is a particular comfort in this kind of story, even as it wears us down, because it explains so much, so efficiently. If I am the one who was wronged, then my caution makes sense, and my sadness makes sense, and the ways I have failed to trust people since make sense as well. The story does real work for us. It is only much later, if we are fortunate, that we notice the cost of keeping a single old wound permanently on staff as the explanation for everything that follows it. The old teachers taught something quietly radical about this. They said that the self we take to be so solid, so continuous, so entirely ours, is in truth something we are building fresh in every moment, out of habit and repetition, the way a path through a field is built, not by the earth itself, but by the same feet walking the same line again and again, until the grass simply gives up growing there. Long ago, in a small mountain temple in Japan, a Zen teacher named Bankei showed a grieving woman exactly this, by asking her to bring him something she was certain she had been carrying her whole life. The temple sat halfway up a wooded slope, its wide eaves dark with age, its courtyard scattered with the season's first fallen leaves, red and gold against the packed grey earth, still faintly damp from the night's mist. A thin column of smoke rose from somewhere behind the main hall, where a novice was already tending the morning's small cooking fire. And the whole mountainside carried that particular hush that settles over a place before it has fully decided the day has begun. Pilgrims came from many days' distance to sit before the old teacher. And on this particular morning, mist still clinging low among the cedars, a woman named Chio arrived among them, her travel robe dusty at the hem, her sandals worn thin from the road, her face composed into the same expression she had worn, without quite realizing it. For almost 20 years, Chio had once been engaged to be married in the town where she had grown up, until her betrothed's family, learning of a debt her own father owed, had broken the engagement publicly and without warning, humiliating her before the entire town on the very morning the matchmaker had come to finalize the arrangements. She had never married. She had built, in the decades since, a small life of quiet usefulness, tending an elderly aunt, keeping a modest household, mending and sewing for neighbors who paid her little and thanked her less, and telling the story of that broken engagement to nearly everyone she met, sooner or later, in the careful tone of someone reciting an old and necessary truth. It was, by now, the very first thing most people learned about her, before her age, or her skill with a needle, or the particular way she laughed at her own small jokes. She was the woman who had been wronged, and she had grown. Over 20 patient years, remarkably skilled at being her. When her turn came to sit before Bankei, in a bare room lit only by the grey morning light through a paper screen, she told him the story as she had told it 1,000 times, precisely, without embellishment, the shame and the debt and the public breaking of the engagement laid out in their proper order, the way she always laid them out, as though presenting evidence in a case that had never once been allowed to close. Bankei listened without interrupting, his hands resting quietly on his knees, his eyes half closed, as though he were listening not only to her words but to the years of practice behind their careful shape. When she had finished, he was silent for a long moment. "You have carried this a very long time," he said at last. 20 years, Chio answered. "It is the truest thing anyone could tell you about me." Bankei nodded slowly. "Then show it to me," he said. "Bring the wound itself before me now, here in this room, so that I may see it directly, and not merely hear its history." Chio blinked, uncertain. "I do not understand," she said. "It happened long ago. There is nothing to bring. There is only the memory of it, and the shape it left in my life ever since." "Precisely," Bankei said, gently, almost kindly. "There is no wound sitting here in this room with us. There is only a woman, in this present moment, choosing once again to build herself out of an old story, the way she has chosen to build herself out of it every single day for 20 years. The engagement broke in a single afternoon, decades ago. The choosing to be the woman it broke has been remade, fresh, every morning since, by your own quiet hand. Though you have never once noticed yourself doing the making, Chiyo felt something rise in her chest, sharp and defensive. "But it happened," she said. "You cannot tell me it did not happen." "I do not say it did not happen," Bunkei answered. "I say only that it is finished happening. What continues, this morning and every morning, is not the old wrong itself, but a fresh decision, made new each day, to answer to its name. You were not born to be the woman who was wronged. You were born, as we are all born, whole and without a single old story attached to you at all. Everything since has been built, patiently, out of your own returning to the same worn path. Outside the temple window, a wind moved briefly through the courtyard, and the last thin scatter of the season's early snow slid free of the dark cedar boughs and vanished before it ever touched the fallen leaves below, leaving the branches, for the first time that whole season, entirely bare beneath the pale morning sky. Chiyo sat with this for a long while, saying nothing, her hands still folded in her lap exactly as they had been through the whole telling of her story. She did not argue further, and she did not weep, though something in her face had gone very still and very open, the way a room looks the moment a heavy piece of furniture has finally been carried out of it, and the light falls differently across the bare floor. When she rose to leave the temple that morning, she found, to her own surprise, that she did not know quite how to introduce herself to the pilgrim walking beside her down the mountain path, and that not knowing, for the first time in 20 years, felt less like a loss than like room. Notice that Bunkei never told Chiyo the wrong had not mattered. He never asked her to forgive the family who had broken her engagement, or to pretend the humiliation had not cut as deeply as it had. He asked her only to notice the difference between a thing that happened once, long ago, and a self that she had been quietly, faithfully rebuilding out of that one afternoon every single day since, brick by patient brick, without ever once questioning whether the building was still necessary. This is perhaps the subtlest form of holding on that exists, because it does not feel like holding at all. It feels like simply being who we are. But the old teachers saw clearly that there is no fixed self sitting somewhere inside us, finished and permanent, waiting only to be described. There is only a river of moments, and what we call ourself is the particular shape the river has been persuaded, through long habit, to keep taking, turn after turn, year after year. The same bend worn a little deeper every time the water passes through it. There is a difference, subtle but enormous, between remembering a wrong and rebuilding an entire self out of it each morning. Memory asks only to be acknowledged, honestly, and then allowed to recede into its proper place among the countless other things that have happened to us across a whole life. Identity asks for something far greater. It asks to be maintained, defended, reintroduced to every new person we meet, kept current and freshly painted, like a house that must never be allowed to look empty, even for a single day. Chiyo had spent 20 years maintaining a house that had, in truth, finished being built the very afternoon the engagement broke. Everything since had been renovation performed on a structure that no longer needed to stand. You are not the worst thing that ever happened to you. You may carry its memory, and rightly so, for memory is not the enemy here. But the wound is not required to go on being your address. Whatever old story you have been introducing yourself with, in the quiet places of your own mind, if nowhere else, you are permitted, starting even now, to let the path grow over a little, and to walk a slightly different way tomorrow. Perhaps there is an old injury that has become the very first thing you reach for when you try to explain yourself, even to yourself. The first sentence you offer whenever someone asks what shaped you. You do not have to defend that explanation tonight. You do not have to prove, once more, that the wrong was real. It was real. And you are also, still, entirely free of any obligation to keep rebuilding your whole self around it every single morning. Feel the space behind your sternum, wide and quiet, where no old story is required in order for you to simply be here, breathing, whole. So let the old name rest tonight, whatever name it is you have long called yourself by. There is no case to present in the dark, no history that needs reciting one more time before you are permitted to close your eyes. You are allowed, simply, to be the one who is here now, without a single old chapter attached. Feel your body settle, wide and unclaimed, into whatever holds it. There is no identity you must maintain through the night. There is no story you must keep faithfully alive while you sleep. Let one breath arrive, belonging to no history at all. Simply air moving in and out of a body that needs no explanation for existing. And let the next breath come the very same unclaimed way. Somewhere, on a quiet mountainside, the cedar branches stand entirely bare beneath a wide, pale sky, holding nothing, needing no old snow to prove that they are still branches. If sleep is near, let it find you exactly like that, unattached to any story about who you have always been. We have walked a long way together now, through the hands that would not open, and the hearts that closed too hard, and the flames kept faithfully burning, and the old stories quietly mistaken for the self. What remains, as the night deepens further still, is something even wider than any single letting go, the whole wide field itself, in which every one of these small releases has always, quietly, been taking place. Chio walked home from that mountain temple, no longer needing an old wound to explain her whole self to strangers. But there is one particular self-story that deserves its own quiet attention before we go further, because it is often the heaviest of all to release, and the one we are most convinced we have no right to release. It is not the story of what someone else did to us. It is the story of what we did, once, to someone else, or failed to do, and have never once forgiven ourselves for since. You may carry a version of this tonight, a moment of carelessness that cost someone else dearly, a decision made in haste, or fear, or simple human limitation, whose consequences outlived the moment itself by years. Perhaps no one blames you any longer, if anyone but you ever truly did. And still, some part of you has quietly assigned itself a life sentence, certain that continuing to suffer is the only honest way of proving that the harm mattered, that you are not the kind of person who simply moves on from having caused it. You may have built, without ever meaning to, an entire private courtroom inside your own chest, where the same case is tried again every few weeks, and the verdict never once changes, and no sentence you hand down to yourself is ever quite long enough to feel finished. The old teachers understood the weight of genuine wrongdoing, and they never asked anyone to pretend a real harm had not occurred. But they made a careful distinction between taking responsibility for a past action and sentencing your whole future self to an unending punishment for it. One is accountability. The other is simply a second, quieter harm, done this time by your own hand, to the only life you actually have left to live well. Long ago, in the hill country of Song, China, and later, in a small mountain kingdom to the south, two very different people discovered exactly where that line falls. The river gorge ran deep and fast below the county town. Its water, the color of jade in the early light, churning white where it broke against the boulders far below. And for 3 generations, a wooden and stone bridge had spanned the narrowest crossing, carrying farmers and merchants and the occasional traveling official between the two halves of the valley. The bridge that stood there in this particular season had been built by a master craftsman named Wei. 20 years before, in the full strength of his early manhood, when his reputation for careful, elegant stonework was already spreading beyond the county's borders, and every governor within 3 provinces had wanted his name attached to their own bridges. In the 3rd spring after its completion, a sudden flood, swollen by an unusually heavy thaw in the mountains above, had struck the bridge with a force no one in the valley had seen in living memory. The central span had given way. A young mother crossing with her infant daughter had been lost in the collapse. The child had somehow been thrown clear and survived, but the mother had not. And though the county magistrate's own investigation later found that no craftsman could reasonably have foreseen a flood of that magnitude, Wei had never once accepted the finding. He had rebuilt the bridge stronger the following year, at his own expense, and had gone on building bridges for another 2 decades with a skill that never diminished. But somewhere inside himself, he had quietly sentenced himself, on that very night, to a guilt that no rebuilding would ever be permitted to satisfy. He was an old man now, still consulted on the largest projects in the province, still respected everywhere he traveled, and still, 20 years later, unable to cross any bridge at all without his hands beginning to shake. A young monk from the temple above the gorge, walking the same road one autumn evening, found the old craftsman standing rigid at the near end of his own bridge, unable to take the final steps across it, as he apparently did every single evening on his way home. "You built this bridge," the monk said, coming to stand beside him. "It is considered the finest crossing in the province." "I built the bridge that fell before this one," Wei answered, his voice flat. "This is only the bridge I built afterward, to make amends for the first." The monk looked at the strong stone arch before them, worn smooth now by 2 decades of ordinary use. "Tell me," he said, "in these 20 years, has this bridge ever once failed to carry a single traveler safely across?" "Never," Wei said. "Not once." "And in these 20 years," the monk continued, "how many travelers do you suppose it has carried?" Wei was quiet for a long moment, doing some rough accounting in his mind, his weathered fingers absently tracing the worn edge of the stone parapet beside him. "Tens of thousands," he said finally. "Perhaps more." "Then tell me plainly," the monk said. "For 20 years, you have paid a debt with a bridge that has safely carried tens of thousands of lives across this gorge. And still you stand here every evening, refusing to walk across your own good work, as though the debt remains entirely unpaid. What amount, precisely, would satisfy you? What number of years, or crossings, or sleepless nights would finally be enough. Wei opened his mouth to answer and found, to his own quiet astonishment, that he did not have a number. He had never once, in 20 years, allowed himself to imagine what enough might actually look like. There is a difference, the monk said gently, between honoring what was lost and refusing, forever, to be forgiven for having been human. The flood was not built by your hands. Only the bridge was. And the bridge you built afterward, out of grief and care and 20 years of unmatched skill, has already given back to this valley many times over whatever a flood once took from it in a single terrible morning. Above them, on the temple roof, visible just past the gorge's far rim, the last patch of an early season snow slid loose in the evening warmth and dissolved into the stone below before it ever reached the ground, and the roofline stood bare and unburdened beneath the reddening sky. Wei watched it a long while. Then, for the first time in 20 years, he took the first slow step onto his own bridge and crossed it, all the way to the far side, without once looking down at the water below. Noticed that the monk never told Wei the mother's death had not mattered, or that his grief for her was excessive or misplaced. He only asked him to name the debt precisely and let Wei discover, on his own, that he had never once set an amount that could be paid, because some part of him had quietly decided the debt was meant to be endless. What Wei learned that evening, a young farmer far to the south, in the mountain kingdom of Bhutan, was still learning to practice the following morning, in a much smaller and more ordinary way. His name was Pemba, and the year before he had made a foolish decision with the family's small savings, trusting a trader's promise that had turned out to be worthless, losing in a single afternoon what his parents had set aside across many careful years. His father had never once reproached him for it. But Pemba reproached himself every morning, waking each day, already rehearsing the apology he had given 100 times before, unable to simply begin the day's ordinary work until he had punished himself with it once more. On this particular morning, his grandmother, who had heard the whole story many times over, found him sitting motionless at the edge of the barley field instead of beginning the morning's threshing. "You are doing it again," she said, settling herself on the low wall beside him. "Paying a debt no one but you is still collecting." "I have to remember it," Pemba said. "If I let it go, I might make the same mistake again." "You may remember it perfectly well," his grandmother answered, "without punishing yourself with it fresh every single morning, before you have even lifted a single stalk of barley. There is a difference between carrying what you have learned forward into your hands, where it can make you more careful, and dragging it behind you every day like a stone tied to your ankle, where it can only slow you down. Bemba, look at your hands. They are already wiser than they were last year. They do not need to be beaten every morning in order to remember what they have already come to know." Pemba looked down at his own hands, roughened now by a year's honest work, and felt something in his chest loosen very slightly. He picked up his threshing tool without another word, and began the day's work a little more quietly than usual, but without the small daily ceremony of self-punishment that had preceded every morning for the past year. It did not vanish all at once, but it grew a little lighter each day that he chose, instead, simply to work well. The old craftsman had paid an endless debt with a bridge that had long since finished repaying it many times over. The young farmer was learning, morning by ordinary morning, to let a single mistake become wisdom in his hands rather than a stone tied permanently to his ankle. Both were practicing the very same quiet skill, carrying responsibility forward without dragging punishment behind them for the rest of their lives. To forgive yourself is not to say the harm did not matter, or that you bear no responsibility for it. It is to notice, honestly, whether the ongoing suffering is still teaching you anything, or whether it has simply become a habit. You continue out of fear that stopping would mean the original wrong no longer counted. Wei's 20 years of unmatched, careful stonework had already answered for the flood many times over. In stone and safe crossings, and the ordinary unremarked lives of thousands of travelers who never once thought to thank him, Pemba's growing carefulness with his family's trust was already answering for his own mistake. One honest season at a time, in small ways that would only ever be visible in hindsight. Years from now, once the barley had been sold and the debt quietly repaid without either of them making any particular ceremony of it. Perhaps there is a debt you have been paying long after it was ever truly owed. You do not have to name the amount that would finally be enough tonight. You might simply notice that the paying itself has become the point, rather than the amends it was meant to make. And let that noticing be the first small step across your own bridge. Feel your hands, wherever they rest now in the dark, and let them be simply hands, capable and forgiven, rather than instruments still awaiting their sentence. So let the debt rest tonight, whatever its size, however long you have carried it. There is no ledger that must be balanced before you are allowed to close your eyes. Whatever you have already given back to the world through your own quiet care since that difficult morning, it has very likely been enough for a very long time now. Even if no one, including you, ever thought to say so aloud. Feel your whole body settle, forgiven and unhurried, into whatever holds it tonight. There is no bridge you must cross before sleep will have you. There is no penance still required. Let one breath arrive without a single condition attached to it, simply because you are alive, and breathing is what a living body does. And let the next breath come exactly as freely. Somewhere, a stone bridge stands finished and strong above a quiet gorge, having long since given back, many times over, whatever a single terrible morning once took from the valley below it. If sleep is near, let it come the same complete way, owing nothing further to anyone, least of all to yourself. We turn now, in these final movements of the night, toward something wider still than any single debt repaid or story released. There is the whole shape of a life we have quietly been trying to hold in place, certain that the future must arrive exactly as we have pictured it. That grip, too, is one the hand can learn to loosen. Let us go there gently, together, in the turn that follows. Pemba learned to carry what he had done without dragging it behind him like a stone. But there is one more grip the hand takes, wider than any single memory or any single guilt, and it touches nearly everything we have spoken of tonight from underneath. It is the grip we place, quietly and constantly, on the future itself, certain that if we could only hold it tightly enough, in exactly the shape we have pictured, everything would finally be safe. You may know this grip by the particular tightness it leaves in the chest when a plan does not unfold the way you needed it to. The extra hour spent rehearsing a conversation that has not happened yet, turning it over from every possible angle as though enough rehearsal could guarantee the outcome. The quiet dread that arrives whenever life shows the smallest sign of moving in a direction you did not choose. A delayed reply, a change in someone's plans, a small unexpected turn in your health or your work or your children's lives, each one landing in the body like a door swinging open onto a draft you cannot quite place. We tell ourselves that this vigilance is simply responsibility, simply care, simply what a sensible person does. And often it is. But somewhere past a certain point, care becomes control, and control becomes a kind of exhausting second job we perform on top of the actual living of our lives, trying to steer a future that was never fully ours to steer in the first place, checking and rechecking a horizon that will arrive in its own time, regardless of how closely we watch it. There is an exhaustion particular to this kind of vigilance that rarely announces itself as exhaustion. It disguises itself as diligence, as foresight, as simply being the kind of person who does not let things slide. And so we rarely notice how much of our waking life has been spent gripping tightly to outcomes we cannot actually command, until something, somewhere, finally makes us set the grip down long enough to feel how tired the hand has grown. The old teachers taught that right effort has its own proper shape. It asks us to till the field, to plant the seed, to water it faithfully according to what is actually within our power to give. It does not ask us to stand over the seed at night, willing it upward by the strength of our worry, nor to reach up into the sky itself and try to wring rain from a cloud that is not yet ready to release it. There is a boundary, subtle but real, between the portion of any outcome that belongs to our own hands and the portion that has never belonged to anyone at all. And confusing the two is perhaps one of the oldest and most exhausting mistakes a caring person can make. Long ago, in a rice farming village in the hills of old Korea, a young farmer learned to see the difference between the two through a single dry and difficult season. The valley lay green and terraced against the mountainside, its paddies stepping down toward the river in long, patient curves that generations of hands had shaped out of the hillside long before this farmer's grandfather was born. Each low mud wall holding the memory of 100 earlier plantings. That particular spring had been unusually dry, the sky pale and rainless, week after week, the mountain streams thinning to a trickle where they usually ran full and loud. And among all the anxious farmers of the village, none watched the horizon more closely than a young man named Joseon, who had inherited his family's fields only the autumn before, and felt the whole weight of that inheritance pressing on him every single morning, before he had even risen from his sleeping mat. The seedlings waited in their beds, tender, green, and ready, their thin blades trembling slightly whenever a dry wind crossed the valley. And every morning Joseon walked the length of the seedbeds before breakfast just to look at them, as though watching alone might somehow hasten the rain that refused to come. But the custom of the valley, tested across many generations, was to hold them until the rains came to properly flood the paddies for transplanting. Since setting them too early, into dry and unready soil, could ruin the whole season's crop before it had truly begun. Joseon understood this. He had watched his own father wait, patiently, through droughts far worse than this one. And still, as the dry days multiplied, he grew more and more certain that waiting any longer was itself a kind of failure. That a truly devoted farmer would find some way to force the season forward rather than simply standing by while the sky refused to cooperate. Against the advice of his neighbors, who had lived through many dry springs before this one and knew the wisdom of waiting, he began carrying water by hand from the river, bucket by exhausting bucket, trying to flood at least a portion of his paddies well ahead of the rains, transplanting the tender seedlings into soil that was still cool and imperfectly settled beneath his feet. He worked from before dawn until well after dark, his shoulders raw from the wooden yoke, the skin across his palms splitting and reforming into hard new calluses, certain that his effort alone could substitute for what the sky was withholding. The other farmers watched him from their own dry fields, some shaking their heads, none quite willing to tell a grieving young man, still new to his father's land, that his labor was likely to cost him more than it saved. An old farmer named Grandfather Sok, who had worked that same valley for over 60 years and had seen droughts come and pass more times than he could easily count, found Joseon one evening collapsed at the edge of his half-flooded field, too exhausted even to stand, watching with something like despair as several of his hand-transplanted seedlings visibly wilted in soil that had not yet properly settled around their roots. The last of the daylight was fading behind the ridge, and somewhere in the darkening paddies, a frog called out once, then fell silent. "You are trying to carry the whole sky on your own back," the old man said, easing himself down onto the low stone wall nearby, with the careful slowness of aging knees. "If I wait any longer," Joseon said, "my family's whole season could fail. I have to do something. I cannot simply sit and watch the sky do nothing." "You have done everything a farmer can rightly do," Grandfather Sok said. "You prepared the seed beds with care. You chose good seed. You have watched the sky faithfully every single day, more faithfully than any of us. Tell me, whose task was it, precisely, to make the rain fall?" Joseon did not answer at first. He looked down at his blistered hands, turning them over slowly in the last of the light. "Mine," he said finally, though his voice wavered even as he said it. "Was it?" the old man asked gently. "Have you ever once, in your whole life, seen a man call rain down from a clear sky by the strength of his own arms?" "No," Joseon admitted. "Then the rain was never your task," Grandfather Sok said. "Your task was the seed, and the soil, and the patient watching. The rain belongs to the sky, and the sky has never once asked your permission for its timing. You have spent this week trying to do the sky's work with your own two hands, and look what it has cost you. Exhausted shoulders, ruined seedlings, and a season no closer to safety than it was a week ago. Above them, the evening clouds, which had gathered without much promise for many days now, thickened suddenly along the western ridge, their undersides darkening to the color of wet slate, and the first few scattered drops began to fall, releasing at last a season's worth of held moisture into the waiting fields. Joseon looked up at the darkening sky, feeling the first cool drops against his upturned face, and then down at his own raw and blistered hands, and felt something in his chest, gripped tight for a week, finally begin to loosen. He did not transplant another seedling that night. He went home, bone-tired, and slept properly for the first time in days. And the following morning, when the rains had settled the paddies exactly as the old customs had always promised they would, he and his neighbors began the transplanting together, in the ordinary, unhurried way the valley had always known, wading side by side through the newly flooded rows, and his fields that year yielded as well as any in the village, including the ones he had exhausted himself trying to force ahead of their season. Notice that Grandfather Sok never told Joseon not to care about his harvest, or not to work hard, or not to plan carefully for his family's future. He never once suggested that a farmer should simply sit idle and hope for the best. He only asked him to notice which part of the work was truly his to do, and which part belonged, always, to something far larger than any single pair of hands, no matter how devoted or how strong. This is the particular exhaustion of trying to control a future that was never fully ours to hold. We till the field of our own effort, faithfully and well, and then, unable to bear the not knowing of what comes next, we reach past the boundary of our own proper work and try to seize the rain itself, the outcome itself, the whole uncertain unfolding of a life that was always going to include far more than our own two hands could ever manage alone. We tell ourselves we are simply working harder, caring more, refusing to be passive. But there is a particular kind of striving that does not actually move the outcome forward at all. It only moves our own exhaustion forward, faster, into a season that was always going to arrive on its own schedule, regardless of how many buckets we carried toward it. There is a quiet honesty required to tell the difference between the two. Effort that tends the field is effort well spent, even when the harvest disappoints us. Effort that tries to seize the sky is effort spent twice over, first in the labor itself, and then again in the inevitable grief of discovering that the sky was never within our reach to begin with. Jason's blistered hands were not a failure of devotion. They were simply devotion pointed, for one difficult week, at a task that had never belonged to him. You may be carrying water tonight toward a field that is not yet ready to receive it, certain that your own effort alone must be what saves the season. You have very likely already done everything that was truly yours to do. The rest was never your task to begin with. Feel your shoulders, which may have been carrying an invisible yoke for far longer than you realized, and let them lower, just slightly, into the dark. So let the sky do its own work tonight. There is nothing more that your own two hands are required to accomplish before you are permitted to rest. You have tilled what needed tilling. You have planted what needed planting. The rest belongs, as it always has, to something wider than yourself, moving in its own unhurried time, indifferent to how tightly you have been gripping the handle of your own worry. Feel your whole body settle now, low and unclenched, into whatever holds it. There is no field to flood in the dark tonight, no season to force ahead of its proper hour. Notice your jaw, your hands, the small muscles around your eyes, and let each one soften by whatever small degree it is able to tonight, without requiring the softening to be complete. Let one breath arrive in its own time, unforced, the way rain arrives when the sky is finally ready, and not a moment before. And let the next breath follow, in exactly the same unhurried way, asking nothing of the one after it. Somewhere, in a quiet green valley, the rain is falling steadily now across newly settled paddies, doing, patiently and without effort, the one part of the work that was never any farmer's task to do alone. If sleep is near, let it come the same unforced way, arriving in its own time, needing nothing further from you at all. The rain fell steadily now across that quiet Korean valley, settling the paddies exactly as the sky had always intended, in its own unhurried time. And beneath everything we have walked through tonight, the words we could not call back, the people we would not let change, the grievances kept warm like coals, the names we outgrew and kept wearing anyway, the flames tended long past their reason, the old stories mistaken for the self. the debts paid over and over, though they were settled long ago. The futures gripped, as though gripping could shape them. There is one final, quiet discovery still waiting, simpler than all the rest, and perhaps the simplest thing of the entire night. You have been asked, again and again this evening, to set something down. But there is a question underneath even that instruction, one worth sitting with now, in this final hour, as the night grows very still. What if the hand was never actually closed around anything solid to begin with? What if all of it, every grievance, and every name, and every hour of careful holding, was never a weight in your palm at all, but only the sensation of your own fingers, clenched around nothing? Think for a moment of how strange this is, once you look at it directly. A grievance has no shape. You cannot weigh it, or set it on a table, or hand it to someone else to hold for a while so your own arm can rest. A name you have outgrown has no edges you could trace with a fingertip. A future you fear has not even happened yet, and so cannot possibly be sitting in your hand this very moment, however real the tightness in your chest may feel when you think of it. And yet the exhaustion these things produce is entirely real. The shoulders truly do ache. The jaw truly does clench through the night. Something is clearly being carried, even if it cannot be found, examined closely, to actually exist as an object anywhere at all. This is not a trick of language. The old teachers meant it plainly. What we call holding on is, in every single case, an action rather than a possession. It is something the hand keeps doing, moment after moment, not something the hand has captured and now keeps safe. Release, then, is not the difficult work of prying something loose from our grip. It is simply the noticing that the grip itself was the whole of the labor, and that the hand, all along, beneath its own tension, was already open. In a small mountain temple in Korea, an old nun taught a young student exactly this, using nothing more than the student's own closed fist. The temple sat high above a river valley thick with morning mist, its low stone walls softened by generations of moss, its single wooden gate opening onto a courtyard where a great old pine, bent and weathered by countless winters, stood watch over the modest halls below. Snow had fallen lightly overnight, dusting the temple roof and the pine's broad lower boughs in a thin, even white, and the whole mountain held that particular hush that follows a first light snow, before any foot has yet disturbed it. Somewhere below the temple wall, a stream that would not fully freeze even in the coldest months moved quietly over its stones, the only sound in an otherwise perfectly still morning. A young student named Hayun had come to that temple 3 years before, grieving many things at once. A mother lost too young, a marriage that had ended badly, a version of her own future she had once been certain of and had since watched dissolve entirely. She had arrived thin and quiet and unable to meet anyone's eyes for the better part of her first winter there. She had worked hard in her 3 years since, rising before dawn for the morning chanting, sweeping the same stone paths in every season, sitting long hours in the cold meditation hall until her knees learned to bear it, and had made real progress, more than she herself often gave herself credit for. And still, on this particular winter morning, she came to the old nun, Sunim Jong, with a familiar heaviness in her chest that she could not quite explain away, a heaviness she had hoped, by now, to have outgrown entirely. I have tried so hard to release everything you have taught me to release, Hyun said, kneeling before the old woman in the small unheated room. And still some mornings I wake and it is all there again, exactly as heavy as before. What am I doing wrong? Sunim Jong regarded her for a long moment, her weathered face unreadable in the pale morning light through the paper screen, and then held up her own open hand, veined and spotted with age, steady despite the cold. Make a fist, she said, as tight as you can manage. Hold it as though your whole life depended on never once letting it open. Hyun did as she was told, her knuckles whitening, her nails pressing hard crescents into her own palm, her arm beginning to tremble faintly with the effort within only a few moments. What are you holding? The old nun asked. Hyun frowned, concentrating, expecting the answer to reveal itself the moment she looked closely enough. Nothing, she said finally, surprised by her own answer. My hand is empty. There is nothing inside it at all. And yet, Sunim Jong said, your whole arm trembles with the effort of holding it. Your knuckles have gone white. If I asked you to hold that fist for one more hour, you would soon be in real pain from an effort spent guarding a hand that contains, and has always contained, absolutely nothing. Hyun looked down at her own clenched fist, and something in her stomach tightened with a recognition she could not yet name, a discomfort that felt, strangely, like the beginning of relief rather than the arrival of bad news. This, Sunim Jong said gently, is precisely what you have been doing with your grief and your anger and the stories you have carried about who you are. You believe you are holding something, a real weight, a real object that must be pried loose finger by painful finger. But there was never an object in the hand. There was only the clenching. The grief was real, once, in the moment it arrived. The anger was real, once, at the person who caused it. But what you have carried since, morning after morning, has not been the grief or the anger themselves. It has been the muscle memory of a fist, held so long that you have forgotten it was ever a choice to keep it closed. Then how do I open it? Hyun asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes fixed on her own still clenched hand as though it belonged to someone else entirely. The old nun smiled, very slightly, the first real warmth Hyun had seen cross her face all morning. You already know how, she said. You have known since you were an infant, before anyone ever taught you to grip anything at all. Simply stop clenching. That is the whole of it. There is no second motion required, no separate act of prying. The hand does not need to be pulled open by some other force. It only needs the original effort, the effort of the closing. To stop being renewed, Hyun let her fingers loosen, slowly, one at a time, watching her own hand as though observing someone else's, and then all at once, and her hand lay open in her lap, empty, exactly as it had been the entire time beneath the fist, though it had not felt empty at all until this very moment, when the trembling finally stopped and the small ache in her wrist began, at last, to fade. Outside the small window, the old pine in the courtyard shifted almost imperceptibly in a breath of cold mountain air, and a fine dusting of the morning's new snow slid from its lowest bough and scattered into the still air below, catching the pale light as it fell in a brief, silent, glimmer, and the branch, which had never truly needed to hold that snow in the first place, simply continued being a branch, unchanged by either the carrying or the releasing. Notice that Sunim Jong never asked Hoon to force anything open, or to fight her own grief, or to pretend that nothing had ever happened to her, or that her mother's early death and her marriage's slow failure had been small or easily set aside. She only asked her to notice, honestly, whether her hand had ever actually been holding a solid, separate thing at all, or whether the entire heaviness had been nothing more than the ongoing, tireless labor of clenching itself, repeated so many mornings in a row that it had come to feel, quite convincingly, like simply the shape of who she was. This is, in the end, the quiet secret underneath every single letting go we have practiced together tonight. The words we could not call back were never actually in our hands to begin with. Only our fists were, closing around the empty place where they had been. The people we would not let change were never truly held in place by us at all. We were only exhausting ourselves gripping a picture that could never have contained a living person to begin with. The grievance, the old name, the flame, the guilt, the future, every single one of them, examined closely enough, turns out to be not a thing we are carrying, but an effort we are making, moment after moment, that we are entirely free to simply stop renewing. Even the branch we have followed all night, bending under its long-held snow, was never truly burdened by anything more solid than this. It only ever needed to stop holding a shape it had grown used to holding, and the snow, which had never asked to be kept in the first place, was simply allowed to become what it had always been on its way to becoming. You do not have to pry anything loose from yourself tonight. You do not have to fight your own grip, or wrestle your own history into submission before sleep will finally come. You only have to notice, gently, whether the hand was ever actually holding anything at all, or whether it has simply forgotten, across a great many tired years, that it was always free to open. Feel your own hands now, wherever they rest in the dark. Notice whether they are clenched, even slightly, around nothing at all, the way Hayun's was, the way perhaps yours has been for longer than you realized, so gradually that the tightness came to feel like simply how a hand is meant to sit. And notice that opening them requires no great effort, no dramatic release, no pulling apart of fingers that do not wish to move. It requires only the old habit of closing to quietly stop being repeated, one breath at a time. So let the whole night holding rest now, all of it, all at once, not because you have finally won some long struggle against it, but because you have simply noticed, at last, that there was never anything solid enough in any of it to require a struggle in the first place. Let your hands lie open, empty and unclenched, exactly as they have always secretly been beneath whatever they believed themselves to be holding. Feel your whole body, wide and unguarded now, resting into whatever holds it. There is no fist left to make in the dark. There is nothing further that needs prying loose. Let one breath arrive, entirely unclenched, and let it leave again the very same way, and let the next one follow, needing nothing from you but its own quiet, ordinary arrival. High on that same mountain, under that same old pine, the snow continues to fall and settle, and slide free and fall again, the way it always has, needing no one to hold it in place, and no one to pry it loose either. It only ever needed permission to be exactly what it already was. We come now, At the very end of this long night together, to the last small turning, quieter than all the ones before it, where nothing further needs to be understood and nothing further needs to be released, and there is only the soft, complete stillness of a hand that was, all along, already open. High on the mountain where this whole night began, the snow has been falling and settling and sliding free and falling again for so many hours now that no one could say any longer where the falling started or where it will end. And there, in the last quiet hour before dawn, beneath the same great pine that once bent low over a swept stone path, a familiar figure sits very still, watching the dark. Huai is an old man now. Many winters have passed since the night a gentle teacher taught him that a word, once spoken, could not be called back, only carried out. He has long since stopped rebuilding his old conversations in the dark. He has grown old inside this same mountain monastery, has swept this same stone path 10,000 more mornings, has watched countless young monks arrive, frightened, and leave. Years later, a little less afraid. Tonight, unable to sleep for no particular reason at all, he has simply come outside and sat down beneath the old pine and let the cold settle around him the way it always has. His joints are stiffer now than they once were. His hands, folded loosely in his lap, are spotted and thin, the hands of a man who has swept the same stones through more winters than he ever thought to count. He does not mind the stiffness tonight. He does not mind the cold. There is a particular ease that comes, very late in a long life, to a body that has finally stopped arguing with its own age, and Huai has arrived, somewhere in these last years, at exactly that quiet agreement with himself. His robe, thin with long use, holds the cold against his shoulders without troubling him, and beneath it, his chest rises and falls with a slowness that would once have frightened a younger man, and does not frighten him now at all. He does not think, tonight, of any old wrong, or any old grief, or any old name he once wore too tightly. There is nothing tonight that needs setting down, because there is nothing tonight that his hands are holding. He simply sits, an old man beneath an old tree, breathing slowly in the dark, watching snow gather on branches that will let it go again in their own unhurried time, the way they always have, the way they always will. Somewhere, very faintly, at the edge of memory rather than hearing, he thinks he catches the soft rhythm of a loom, a shuttle passing back and forth, though there has been no loom in this monastery in all his years here. Somewhere else, fainter still, a small flame seems to flicker at the corner of his vision, though when he turns his head, there is only the dark garden and the falling snow. Further off yet, so faint it might be nothing more than the wind moving through frozen grass, he thinks he hears water, a slow river, or perhaps only the memory of one, carrying something small and wooden along its quiet current. He does not chase these small, drifting impressions. He does not ask what they mean, or where they come from, or whether they belong to some other night entirely, some other life entirely, some story that was never quite his own to begin with. He only lets them pass through him the way the cold air passes through the bare branches above, welcomed, unexamined, already moving on, the way a mountain lets clouds pass across it without once trying to hold a single one of them in place. The snow continues to fall, unhurried, flake by flake, settling on the temple roof, on the courtyard stones, on the old man's own still shoulders, and melting there almost as soon as it lands, leaving only the faintest cool trace before it is gone entirely, already forgotten by the same body that felt it arrive only a moment before. Huai does not brush it away. He does not mind its brief, cool touch, or its equally brief departure. It arrives, and it leaves, and something in him has long since stopped needing it to do anything else. Above him, the lowest bough, heavy now, with the night's quiet accumulation, bends a little further, and further still, and then, without announcement, without effort, lets its whole soft weight go all at once. The snow falls, and scatters, and disappears into the dark below, and the branch, freed, rises very slowly back toward the sky, the way it has risen every single night of Huai's whole long life, though he has only truly seen it happen this clearly a few times. He does not reach for the branch. He does not think about what it means. He simply watches it rise, and feels his own shoulders rise very slightly with it, unbidden, the way a body sometimes moves in quiet sympathy with something it recognizes without needing to name. Somewhere far below, past the dark tree line, a single light still burns in the window of the meditation hall, small and steady, asking nothing of the mountain around it. Huai does not wonder who lit it, or whether they are waiting for anyone, or what they might be holding tonight in the quiet of their own chest. He only notices that it burns, warm and unhurried, the way a small good thing burns, simply because burning is what it knows how to do. The cold moves gently across his face. His breath rises before him in the dark and disappears, and rises again and disappears again, over and over, needing nothing from him but to keep arriving. His hands rest open in his lap, empty, unclenched, the way they have rested for so many years now that he no longer remembers what it felt like to hold them any other way. He does not know how long he sits there. Time, on a night like this, on a mountain like this, does not ask to be measured. The snow keeps falling. The branch keeps letting it go. The small light keeps burning below. And somewhere beneath all of it, an old man breathes, slowly, in the dark, belonging to nothing in particular, needing to become nothing in particular, simply here, simply breathing, simply held by the same quiet mountain that has held him all along. A last handful of snow slides free from a higher branch, catching what little light there is, turning once, softly, before it settles into the deeper dark below and is gone. Huai watches it go the way he has watched 1,000 such small fallings before it, without grasping, without naming, without needing it to mean anything more than exactly what it is. The mountain does not keep count of how many times the snow has fallen and been let go. It only continues, unhurried, through one more quiet night, among the very many it has already known, and will go on knowing, long after this one has ended. Far below, past the last dark ridge, the sky, along the eastern edge of the world, has not yet begun to lighten, though somewhere beneath the horizon, the very first suggestion of morning is already gathering, patient and unseen, the way it gathers every night, regardless of who is awake, to notice its approach. Huai does not watch for it. He has watched a great many dawns arrive from this same spot beneath this same tree, and he no longer feels the need to hurry any of them along by waiting for them too closely. The morning will come when it comes. It always has. There have been mornings, across all these years, when he rose from beneath this tree stiff and cold and unready for the day ahead, and mornings when he rose lighter than he had felt in months, and the tree itself had never once seemed to notice or care which kind of morning it was about to become part of. It simply stood and waited, and let the light arrive in its own time, exactly as it is doing now. A small night bird calls once, somewhere in the dark trees below the temple wall, and is answered, faintly, by another further off, and then both fall silent again, leaving only the soft, continuous hush of falling snow and the old man's own unhurried breath to fill the space where the calls had been. Kwai's eyes have closed now, though he is not asleep, only resting inside the stillness, the way a stone rests inside a riverbed, unmoved by the water passing gently over it, undisturbed by the cold, undisturbed by the dark, simply present, simply here, simply one more small and settled thing among all the other small and settled things this quiet mountain has gathered to itself across its own immeasurably long and patient night. The temple bell, hanging silent in its wooden frame near the main hall, holds the night's cold inside its bronze without complaint, waiting for the hand that will eventually come, hours from now, to wake it into its single slow morning note. It does not strain toward that moment. It only waits, the way the whole mountain waits, unhurried, unclenched, entirely at ease with arriving exactly when it arrives, and not one moment before. The way it has waited through every dawn Kwai has ever known, and every dawn that came long before him, and every one that will come after he, too, has finally become part of this mountain's own quiet, unhurried memory. Kwai's breath continues, slow and even, rising into the cold air and dispersing before it has any chance to linger, exactly as it has done every night of his whole long life, exactly as it will continue doing for as many nights as remain to him, each one entirely sufficient unto itself, asking nothing of the nights that came before it, and nothing of the ones still to come. Somewhere within that same slow rhythm, unremarked and unnamed, lies every breath he has ever taken beneath this tree, the frightened breaths of a young monk who could not sleep for the weight of an old regret, and the steady breaths of an old man who no longer remembers what it felt like to carry one, folded now into this single quiet exhale, indistinguishable from it, at peace with it. Simply one more breath among the countless others the mountain has already witnessed and will go on, witnessing long after this particular old man has become, himself, only another quiet part of it, somewhere inside him, so quietly that he does not think to name it as anything at all. There is the simple, wordless recognition that he has, at some point across all these many winters, arrived at exactly what that young monk once needed, a gentle old teacher to show him beneath this very tree. Not an answer, not something learned and filed carefully away, only this, an old man, breathing, beneath an old branch, in the falling snow, holding nothing, needing to hold nothing, entirely at peace with the simple, the ordinary miracle of being here at all, in this body, on this mountain, in this particular, unremarkable and entirely sufficient moment. The snow continues. The branch continues. The small light below continues its patient burning. And Kwai continues too, breathing slowly in the dark, No longer any particular story at all. Only a quiet presence beneath a quiet sky. Exactly as complete, in this moment, as the mountain itself, needing no further understanding, no further release, no further anything at all beyond this single unhurried breath, and the one that will follow it. In its own good time, the wind moves once through the high branches, softly, and settles. The light below flickers, gently, and steadies. The breath rises, and falls, and rises again. And the mountain, vast and dark, and endlessly patient, holds it all. The falling snow, the rising branch, the small steady flame, the old man's slow and unhurried breath, without needing any of it to be anything other than exactly what it already is. Let your own breath rise now, the same unhurried way. Let it fall. Let it rise again, asking nothing of you, needing nothing from you, simply arriving, simply passing, simply arriving once more. There is nothing left to hold tonight. There is nothing left to set down. There is only the mountain, and the snow, and the small burning light, and your own slow breath moving quietly through the dark, exactly as it was always going to move, exactly as it is moving now. Rest. Somewhere on that mountain, the snow has finally stopped falling, and the branch you have followed all night long stands quiet now, beneath a pale and softening sky, holding nothing, having lost nothing worth mourning in the holding, only a little lighter, a little freer, exactly as it was always meant to become. Tonight we have walked together through the cold hills of old China and the weaving towns of Japan, through a Korean rice valley and a Sri Lankan shrine beneath a Bodhi tree, through a Tibetan monastery and a river in old Vietnam, each one offering the same quiet truth in its own patient voice. The hand that opens does not lose what it releases. It only stops mistaking the holding for the love. You are allowed to open your hands tonight. Whatever you have carried here, a word, Ifurasen, a grievance, a name, a flame, a debt, a future, you are allowed to set it down without losing what mattered inside it. What mattered was never the weight. It was only ever the love, and the love does not require your grip in order to remain entirely real. You can rest now. You can rest completely. Nothing you released tonight was ever going to disappear simply because your fingers finally uncurled. Let your whole body sink now into whatever holds it, heavier with each breath, lighter with each letting go. There is nowhere left to be tonight but exactly here, and nothing left to do but exactly this, breathing, resting, quietly becoming as unclenched as the falling snow itself. I did not always know how to do this. There were years I mistook holding tightly for loving well, and it took a great many quiet nights, not unlike this one, before my own hands finally learned what yours are learning now. Tomorrow, may you wake a little lighter than you fell asleep. May the things you release tonight stay released in the morning light, and may whatever you still find yourself holding meet you gently, without judgment, ready to be set down again whenever you are ready. A little more of it each time, without any need to hurry the process along. If these hours have been good company, consider staying close for the next one. Sleep now, unclenched and unhurried, the way a branch rests after the last snow has finally slipped free, needing nothing further, having lost nothing true, simply here, simply breathing, Simply, finally, at rest.